Good evening, everyone. I would like to share with you today how to use Azure App Service to deploy your Python app. So this is the tutorial on the Microsoft website documentation. Create a Python app using Azure App Service on Linux. So I find the Azure App Service is very handy because it actually helps you to avoid all the tricky situations that you might need to encounter using Docker. But then it still does this pretty much the same thing to deploy your Python app to Azure service. So let's take a look at what this documentation is saying. So basically, there are several steps, which is firstly, so getting that you do have your Python installed, and then also you need to have the Azure command line tools to be installed on your computer. And then, so basically the Python 3 version is to check that you have Python installed, and then AZ version is to check if you have Azure command line installed. And then AZ login is just to use the Azure command line to log in to the Microsoft Azure portal. And this is the GitHub repository on Microsoft Azure samples that how they deployed the app. And I'm actually going to show you putting all this together just in 1 minute. How do you actually get this work from end to end? And then so after you clone this repository, then you can log in. And then here on the terminal, what you need to do, so this step is just to create a Python environment, like a virtual environment to manage the packages and stuff. And then this one is just to install the libraries that you need for your Python app. And then using Flask run is to launch the Flask Python app on your local. So here you can see that the Flask Python app is launched on your local. And then here, this step is how you can actually deploy it. So as you can see, it's really easy by using the command line for Azure to deploy using the Azure App Service. So what you just need to do is just type the command AZ web app, and then choosing the tier of the Azure App Service. So B1 is the most basic one, but then it still incurs some cost for the Azure App Service. And then this name is the application name you want to use for your app to put on Azure. One thing to note is that this app name needs to be unique, which doesn't exist on the Azure portal, like the entire Azure portal, which means that it's not just that you haven't used the app name yet, but also other people on the web hasn't used it yet. So this is something to need to take attention for. And then after you deploy this to the Azure App Service, then you will see that it will be available on the URL of the app name and then .azureservice.net. So here it is. So here, okay, not Azure Service, but azurewebsites.net. So here you can see that this is the link that it will be available at. So that's why you can understand why the app name needs to be different from any of the others that have used, because they will actually share the same domain name, .azurewebsites.net, right? With the application name that you chose. Okay, so I'm gonna show you that I actually created GitHub repository here. So here in this Flask sub depository, so you can see that I kind of like summarize the procedures from beginning to end to deploy the Python app to Azure App Service that you need to do, like from scratch, like from the clean base, right? So, so here, if you are running a Ubuntu system, this is what you can do. So you can, like, you don't need, but I'm gonna show you, actually probably don't need to, if you want to completely do it by yourself from scratch, you don't really need to git clone this repo. I'm gonna show you what are all the necessary steps that you need to set up to actually get this work. So what I do to set up the whole environment and all the utility tools is that I actually wrote them down into 2 shell scripts. So just to set up the preparations to deploy the app. So the first shell script that I have is, firstly, you need to be able to have pip installed on your Ubuntu, given that, like, assuming that you actually don't have it installed from like a clean slate, right? So, so this is how you install the pip on Ubuntu. And then secondly is you need to install conda, mini conda. So this is the command that you on Ubuntu Linux to get to install mini conda, right? So just pay attention that the pip install conda actually doesn't work, for me at least, when I was trying the Ubuntu subsystem for Windows. So therefore, if you actually did that before using pip install conda, what you need to do is actually pip uninstall the conda. Otherwise, it would just mess up this mini conda installation. So once you run this command to get the mini conda installer, you will see that it will actually show up in your current repository. And then once you see that installer as a shell script, so what you need to do is do chmod +x, this shell script installer for miniconda. This command is to make your shell script executable. And after you did this, then what you can do is just to run this shell script to install the miniconda. So after you do this step, what you need to do, an extra step, is to actually get miniconda onto your path variable. So this is what you should do to export path, and then the path to your miniconda installation, and then output it to export it to the path variable. And there you go. Then you can actually access the conda command on your terminal. So then you can use conda create name, and then your deployment, your environment for Python virtual environment for this deployment project. So this first step is to actually complete the steps to get it ready for your Python virtual environment. So this is pretty much the whole purpose of this first setup script. So then the second setup script is just one thing to note that like I tried to actually activate the Conda virtual environment in this shell script, but it actually didn't go through. So if you also encountered the same problem, what you can do is to type Conda init, so CONDA init on your terminal separately. And then do conda activate your Python virtual environment separately as well on the Ubuntu terminal. So after you have done that, so then you can run the other remaining scripts on this shell script. So then you can do curl the Azure command line installer. So this is the way that how you can install the Azure command line to your local. So after you have done this, then you can actually access the Azure command line on your computer. Then you can install the libraries that is stored in this requirements.txt for running your Python web application. And then the next step is to using AZ login to authenticate your Azure portal account. And then the final step is to run the AZ web app. So this command will make sure that your app will be deployed to Azure App Service. So usually the Python application to be deployed to Azure Web Service, it will be needed to named as application.py or app.py. So this is how Azure Web Service can identify your Python application. So there we go. So this is pretty much how you can deploy a simple, easy Python web application to Azure Web Service. So isn't that very easy? It just like saves your a lot of sweat if you are not familiar with Docker. So there you go. Thanks for watching. See you next time.